Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 7 Field Services Predictions to Increase Revenue and Improve CX in 2023, brought to you by Technology and Services Industry Association and sponsored by Field Nation. My name is Delia Osborne, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you within 24 hours via email. Audio will be delivered via streaming, and all attendees are currently in a listen-only mode. Your webinar controls, including volume, can be found in the toolbar at the bottom of the media player window. We encourage your comments and questions at any time. If you think of a question for the presenter at any point, please submit through the Ask a Question box in the top left side of the webinar console. Time permitting, we will address questions at the end of today's session. Lastly, feel free to enlarge the slides to full screen at any time by selecting one of the full screen button options, which appear on the top right corner of the slide player window. I'd now like to introduce our presenters for today, John Ragsdale, Distinguished Researcher and Vice President of Technology Ecosystems for TSIA, and Wael Mohammed, Executive Vice President, Strategy, Field Nation. As with all of our TSIA webinars, we do have a lot of exciting content to cover in the next 45 minutes, so let's jump right in and get started. John, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Delia. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We all know that 2023 is already looking like it's going to be a crazy year, and I know that most of you are going to be heading off to some company offsites and kickoff meetings in the next few weeks. And this is a great opportunity to learn a lot of interesting information about what some of the predictions are for field service in 2023. And you're gonna love all of the data that Wael has. It's some really interesting market data from different perspectives, and his predictions are really insightful and I think very actionable for all of you as you're trying to figure out how we can best succeed this year. So I wanna open with kind of setting the stage, and we teased these market forces in the abstract for today's webinar, and clearly we're all dealing with inflation and price fluctuations both at a personal level and at a business level, and it's having a kind of a big impact on our spending power and our budgets for this year. Supply chain disruptions continue to be kind of the scapegoat excuse we get for everything that's late these days. And if you're dealing in a heavy logistics area, I'm sure that this is something that you're dealing with. And of course, the labor crisis. We've first had, the great resignation and the great reshuffle, and now we're dealing with quiet quitting. But there's a lot going on, in particular in the field service market, which we're going to go into some detail on later, with the average age of the field service labor in particularly North America is getting near retirement age, and we're starting to see some really big impacts of that and companies figuring out what their talent strategy will be moving forward. So I reached out to Kevin Bowers, who is the Director of Research in our Field Service Research Practice, and he shared some of the trending data from our benchmark. We are seeing that field service tech annual attrition rates, both voluntary and involuntary rates, are trending up. As I said, we're seeing some of that is due to retiring workers, and companies are trying to figure out what the strategy is, because replacing them is not always an answer. The people with those incredibly rich skills from working 20, 30 years for these companies, you can't replace that talent. And if you could, the cost would be a little out of reach. And as a result, one of the trends we're seeing is that field service organizations are increasingly relying on outsourcing and staff augmentation strategies. Utilization rate is up, and that's good. That means that we're doing a better job of scheduling techs so that they're spending less time, sitting on the bench. The next two, I was a little surprised that we're not seeing an increase in the cost of spare parts, logistics, and fleet costs. They're kind of flat, but I would point out that our benchmark data is a 3 to 5 year trending average, and so we don't always see quick reactions in our data for things that have happened in the last 6 months or to a year. But my guess is for most of you, if you're doing a lot of logistics work, you are seeing some prices go up, and absolutely with the incredible fuel cost alone over the last year, I think fleet costs must be up as well, though I just heard this morning on NPR that that's looking better for this year. I think the scariest thing on this slide is that the corporate allocation of corporate budget for field service has been trending down. And, clearly the impact that a field tech has on the customer experience, everything is virtual these days. So they're not meeting in person with your salespeople, probably the implementation people, the customer success managers. It's almost all virtual. So the field tech in your home or office, face-to-face, has an incredible potential to impact the customer experience positively or negatively. And we want to make sure that as budgets are being looked at, that we want to protect and defend that field service budget. So some data from the Aquant 2023 Service Intelligent Benchmark. If you haven't found that, I would Google that. It's a really great report. Some of the things that they noted is the number of overall field service events is trending up. And this fits into one of TSIA's themes about rising complexity, and customers just struggle to use equipment correctly. And that means that they can't always troubleshoot it and fix things on their own. So field service visits are trending up. First-time fix rates are going up, and that's a great thing. And in part, that's due to remote diagnostics, self-service capabilities. But we also see in this Aquant report that there was a pretty big jump in cost for resolution. And again, that's about labor costs, it's about parts costs, it's about fleet costs. Everything seems to be going up. So even though we're upping our utilization rate, we're upping our first-time fix rate, those positives may be negated by the fact that each visit, each resolution is trending up on average. So I mentioned the customer experience, and I wanted to throw some numbers out here, again, from our benchmark. The average satisfaction for field service on-site visits averages 4.6 on a 5-point scale, pace setters a 4.8. Average satisfaction with time to resolve averages 4.5 on a 5-point scale, pace setters 4.7. So not a huge difference between the industry average and the pace setters. Where we do see a pretty significant difference is on the Net Promoter Score, and this is when you follow up after a field service visit and ask if they would recommend your company, your product, your services. And on average, that's around 60%, which is pretty typical for industry data on NPS. But look at the pace setters, 83, 84%. That is significant. And if you've got some pace setter numbers on some of these experience metrics or other experience metrics, you need to be making sure your executives understand that you are providing an incredible experience, and that is definitely going to influence long-term account profitability. So we know from some survey work we did late last year, 49% of B2B companies are expecting hiring freezes or layoffs, 57% are expecting their budgets to be flat or declining. And you really have to make sure that executives understand the impact that your techs are having on long-term account profitability, and delivering this exceptional experience has got to be a priority. And hopefully, if you can message that effectively, it's going to protect you a bit from some of these hiring freezes or budget freezes as we move into 2023. Well, that's kind of a look at a high level at some of the impacts. And now I'm going to turn it over to Wael Mohammed. He is the EVP of Strategy for Field Nation. So Wael, welcome back to another TSIA webinar.
Well, thank you so much, John, and thank you, Delia. I really appreciate you partnering on this, and thank you also for the audience for taking part of your precious time today to have this conversation that we're going to continue to have for the next several months and quarters to really learn through this together. For those of you who are not familiar with Field Nation, we are the leading marketplace for on-demand field services talent. We are laser sharp focused on technology field services. So as opposed to any other marketplaces that could be doing, horizontally across the board kind of different things, we are really laser sharp focused on field services. We connect tens of thousands of technicians with, thousands of buyers, service buyers on our marketplace every year. And this results in recently, over the last 12 months, the recent number is over one or close to 1.5 million jobs. So over the years, we've amassed amount of data, millions and millions of jobs, that gives us the opportunity to dig deep into this data and uncover real-time trends as they happen, and also detect longer-term trends as they start happening. The reason this is the case is that by the law of large numbers, when you have these very large numbers of jobs running through your platform, what you end up happening is that it's almost like really a true representation of an economy of a certain market. In that case, it is the on-site field services, technology field services market. So think of our marketplace as really a micro representation of the economy of the field services market that is happening every day. And because of that data, we get to see trends as they start brewing. And we're very happy to come back and share that with a very esteemed, valuable community of field services, and exchange not only the thoughts and ideas, but also learn together. So why now? Why do we need to be proactive? Well, of course, as John just mentioned, this is when the planning cycles are happening, the offsites, and we're very familiar with that as well. So we need to really take a look at which verticals, service types are growing, because we know the field services community is interested in understanding that, and which are stagnant. This is key to understanding the volatility in the market that is about to happen, already started happening. And how does the current market condition really influence the input costs for field services, including the labor, the travel, and equipment. And also together, work on few predictions that we prepared for you that we think are driven by the data, are about to happen. And so we'd like to definitely exchange our thoughts with you about them. And given all that, arm you with data that we know from the marketplace on pricing fluctuations, especially on these input costs, any supply chain disruptions that we're seeing, and what is it related mostly to, like what segments would be seeing that the most, what is up to date with the labor crisis. I know that John just shared some insights about it. We're going to talk about it as well, and what to make out of this entire macro trend of volatile market conditions, and how these predictions can help us really weather through the storm. And so let's go through these together. And so, but before doing this, one thing that we really would like to do is talk about these macro trends in a way that help us like really see them from what is the governing structure that really governs them. And the way we like to look at them is based on what is tailwind. There is still tailwind, and we actually have to always be positive. It's one of the key success factors, is to always be positive. So tailwind, there is tailwind, and there is headwind that we need to plan for. But from a tailwind perspective, Field Nation sees, and really based on the marketplace data, is that there will be, and the macro trends that are happening, there will be a continued macro trend of focus on consumer digitalization. What does that mean? That all the technologies that are contributing into digitalizing the consumer experience are here to stay, and they're going to continue as a trend, including technologies like self-checkouts, digital signage, self-order kiosks, proliferation and explosion of connected devices like sensors and cameras, especially cameras from an analytical standpoint. These are becoming packaged with a lot of analytics offerings. And all the devices that are connected with RFID and can help, especially retailers, better manage inventory across multiple channels, especially the online and the store. Because of the increase in online shopping, retailers can no longer afford not to have a connected experience between online and the store. Stores are now working as fulfillment centers. And so RFID technology and installations related to RFID and electronics of labels, all these are technologies that are going to continue proliferating. One of my colleagues yesterday shared with me a very interesting statistic that minimum of $4 billion is estimated as the abandoned shopping carts in retail stores. And this is not, the retailers are not happy about that. So what they need to do is make sure this 4 billion is resulting from lack of enough store attendants, and cashiers. So the labor crisis is causing a lot of frustration by some of the consumers because they're not able to find the cashier in time to be able to check out in a reasonable way. So they abandon the entire shopping experience, and this is very frustrating. And we do know that when the consumer abandons the shopping experience, it's not only abandoning that shopping cart, they could be abandoning the store altogether in the future. So it is such an interesting dynamic happening. Digitalization of consumer experience is going to continue to happen, and all the devices and technologies connected to that are going to continue to thrive. There is consumer shift and spend to QSRs. This happened during COVID. It will continue to happen. This is such a sustainable trend. And then all these connected devices and proliferation puts emphasis on infrastructure, including cabling and networking, particularly wireless installations. This is going to continue, though will reduce a little bit through Q1 and Q2. I'm going to talk about predictions in a minute, but it's over the longer term, it's a macro trend that is really going to continue to happen, and is headwind resulting from that. And because of the rising security concerns, this could be viewed as negative. But in the meantime, for field services, this is really a great opportunity for massive amount of CCTVs, alarms, and security camera installations with all the analytics offerings connected with that. So that's going to continue as a macro trend. And 1.5 years ago or so, when we connected on trends during COVID, we saw major shift into working from home. That is getting balanced again by hybrid workforce model that is pushing the balance again back to the corporate offices, where some of the technologies connected to the corporate offices, especially VoIP, especially meeting technology and video conference technology, that is going to also be a macro trend that is going to continue to happen. So there is some recovery of end user computing, especially the technologies that are related to video conferencing. And then some headwind that we know are happening, but require digging a little bit deeper into. There's potential recession that may or will actually, most likely, based on the predictions that we have, decrease the capex or the project spend for the next 2 to 3 quarters. The good news is that economists see that, or through the data of the past, rarely there is any recession that went beyond 18 months to 2 years. The majority of recessions take place within 1 year. And we do know that the Feds are doing everything in their hands to avoid a long recession scenario and make sure that the inflation is within control in the next 18 months. Right now, inflation is at 6.6%, I think. And the prediction is that by the end of 2023, it should be, based on the predictions of the Feds, around 4.7%. And they want to bring it back all the way between 2 and 3% within 18 months. So they're doing everything that they can to avoid a longer recession scenario. And so this is really good news. And empirically, no recession took place for longer than 1 year, except for very few in the past. And that's not a very common scenario. Supply chain disruptions, as John mentioned, although we expect that this would hit most in areas where we saw a lot of backlogs, including particularly wireless access points, causing some project push outs, especially in wireless and networking equipment. And some sectors are still recovering, and they have not fully recovered from COVID. In fact, a recession scenario might impact them even yet deeper, especially like retail, apparel, and hospitality. What does that mean? It means slowdown in hospitality related to travel. So hotels would be impacted by this. Retail apparel would be impacted, means that new store openings or store remodels in retail apparel and mall would also be impacted. And we're going to go through a little bit of more detail on this. There's a shift to online experience, and that means that in retail, this is going to impact retail in both positively and negatively. Negatively, it means retail is going to be more rationalized about where to spend in which stores, but also it means increase in the technology footprint in the stores where they plan to invest into. And from a banking and insurance perspective, this is an industry or a market that is going almost completely online and rarely in the store. So that is also going to impact the work that is happening on site there. And one key trend that we see continuing to happen is that the equipment is continuing to become more and more failure proof, and the time between failures is increasing. In fact, there is a pressure on OEMs to keep driving more efficiency on this, especially in a recession scenario. That is going to be like something very important for them to pay attention to, because buyers are looking for efficiency from their budgets, and so they will favor technology upgrades into more efficient OEM technology that fails less. And so based on this, we really want to do some predictions, and really enjoy sharing these with you based on the data we have. Based on the data we have over the last 12 years or so, we were able to detect scenarios of contraction and expansion. Expansion, like what happens in inflation, and contractions, like what happens in a recession. And the most recent example for contraction was what happened during the early recovery phases of COVID. And so that gave us enough data to see what will the field services industry behave in during the time of contraction, when there is a lot of pressure on reducing costs, when there's a lot of pressure on the market. And so prediction number one is that the field service spend will decline in 2023, but return to normal by Q4 2023. And that return to normal is contingent on very strong or very good predictions on a healthy holiday season from retail. Well, now it depends on how much retail is penetrated into your revenue portfolio, but in general, for field services, retail seems to be 70 to 80% sometimes penetrated into field services spend, and that percentage varies per where you're at, whether you're more of a focused on healthcare, focused on education, focused on different sectors. But retail is a massive contributor into field services macro trends, and the reason for that is that there's over 1 million sites from the retail segments, and these million sites contribute huge deal to the retail field services spend. And so we do expect some decline in first half of the year. Depending on the holiday season predictions, there will potentially be going back to normal by Q4. When we look at how this presented itself during COVID, the way it happened is that it happened in a shape of an L-shaped recovery. An L-shaped recovery happened in a way that we expect will happen again during a recession scenario, where there will be a quarter of impact, we call it that way. Now that quarter of impact will mimic the second quarter after COVID, not the first quarter. Because the first quarter after COVID, there was like a market shock wave that took the market down by almost like 50% drop, 50 to 60% drop. And that 50 to 60% drop was not inherently because of contraction issues, but it was inherently because unavailability of sites. Sites were not available because of COVID. That is not going to happen again. Sites are available, but what's happening is that there is reduction in CapEx or capital expense. And so that limits budgets a little bit. And so we expect that contraction to go into a quarter of impact, where there is a reduction of 10% compared to the previous year or year over year growth contraction expectation. And then the quarter of deeper impact is the ensuing quarter of negative 20%. And then that starts to smooth itself again into recovery, depending on how much retail is penetrated into your revenue portfolio. But in the case of projections of good holiday season, then it starts to smooth into negative 10% and back into normal in Q4 of 2023. And then in Q1, if recession starts to go away based on economists' prediction that it should not take longer than a year, even though nobody really knows exactly how long it will take, but most of the predictions based on the past is that it should not take longer than that period of time. And so based on that, the fifth quarter should be a quarter of growth again. So this is what we predict will happen again during a recession scenario. Take an L-shaped recovery, 5 quarters to go back to growth, a quarter of slight negative impact, and a quarter of deep impact down to negative 20%, and then a quarter of recovery up to negative 10%, and then a quarter of normalization and a quarter of growth again. So that scenario, we expect that it will repeat based on the data from the past and based on what we saw during COVID. But let's dig a little bit deeper into the predictions related to that. So this has to do with the segments of the market and what types of service types are really related to this recession cycle, and which ones are the most impacted and which ones will not. So complex work is one of the types of work that typically gets most impacted. Let's break that down a little bit for you. So we look at types of or service types at Field Nation in a way where there is a myriad of variety of them, down to like almost a dozen, but the dominant ones are like 8 of them. And these are like maintenance has predictive maintenance and incidental or break fix. And then when you look at deployments, there is ad hoc installations and there are massive deployments. And when you look at complex work, there is new store openings and store remodels and so on and so forth. So there are really several project or service types. And we do expect that the service type that gets impacted the most typically is the complex work, because this is the most associated with new store openings and store remodels. And depending on how penetrated retail is into your revenue portfolio, even in other areas like clinics, like education, if there is a budget contraction, the first thing typically that gets deprioritized is remodeling. So we do expect in the first half of the year that there will be negative 30 to 40% contraction in this, driven by what we saw also during COVID. However, there is detail again, like I said, so we want to go a little bit into that detail. When it comes to deployments, there will be some push outs or prioritization, especially related to the stores that deserve this new technology or any new technology deployments, because retailers like to rationalize the spend a little bit and prioritize, and this is similar to what we saw during COVID. So they will prioritize, so expect some drop in deployments, but that should not be more than negative 20%. The more of the drop will be in the complex projects, close to negative 30 to 40%. And that is particularly in the store remodels and the new store openings. And then the maintenance or the break fix, we expect negative 5 to negative 10% drop based on year over year. And that is because break fix is typically very mission critical, so it doesn't get impacted the most. But that negative 10% is resulting from discretionary deprioritization of the preventative maintenance. If you go through what kind of devices or technologies would get impacted the most by these drops in based on these different types of services, in deployments, we do expect that wireless access points will be impacted by especially by the backlogs that are still that some of the OEMs are still struggling with. Desktop laptop is one of the areas also that gets deprioritized. We expect that digital signage will be a little bit deprioritized because it's not mission critical at this point. And again, that's through the first half of the year. It should come back. And then telecom VoIP and ATMs, particularly ATMs, is not an area where banking is putting a lot of emphasis, except for some upgrades in some cases, and some necessary deployments, but not extremely, because there is a lot that can be done online. And then when it comes to complex projects, the structure cabling, which is infrastructure, and wireless access point surveys and heat mapping, which is infrastructure work that we were referring to, that will get deferred during the first half of the year, as well as the wireless access points. But there are areas that will continue to thrive a little bit because they're connected with retailers trying to catch up with NRF top NRF retailers that already started having competitive edge when it comes to digital experience that they want to catch up with. So there will continue to be some investments into the digital consumer experience, especially related to self-checkouts, outdoor menu boards, and security particularly. One key thing to look at here, one key insight, is to try to connect the devices or the technologies to how critical they are to the either reducing the costs, like self-checkouts, they're critical for that from an automation standpoint, or overcoming the labor crisis. Also connecting it to how critical it is to the revenue of the retailer segment. And so when you look at outdoor menu boards, for example, we do know that almost 70% of the revenue of QSRs, quick serve restaurants, is driven by the drive-through and delivery. So there is no way for QSRs to survive without really having a great outdoor menu board experience. All the investments that they have in the indoor menu boards shifted outdoor, accelerated by COVID. So that is going to continue to happen because it's very critical to the revenue. As it relates to the maintenance, there is no change except into the predictive maintenance, which is, again, not a massive part of the volume. And then if you look at prediction 3, this is what we were just talking about, is that infrastructure work will soften in Q1 and Q2, but will come back and see growth in the longer term. The reason, again, is mainly driven by majority of retailers and quick serve restaurants have not yet caught up with the digital experience that the leaders have installed. And you might see that already in many quick serve restaurants that are really massively going about installing outdoor menu boards, because it has become a consumer expectation. Some of the on-site retail technology, including self-checkouts, have become consumer expectation, and also is germane to the reduction in costs and overcoming the labor crisis. So that puts a lot of emphasis on infrastructure. All these devices, including also the massive explosion of connected devices, puts a lot of emphasis into infrastructure. So that infrastructure work will have to come back for all this work to be happening, because all this puts a lot of emphasis on especially the wireless bandwidth. So we expect that to soften during Q1 and Q2, but really come back powerful facing the holiday season. And if you looked at this during COVID, what happened is that, from before COVID into after COVID, really the equipment work recovered in terms of the traditional equipment, recovered in a way where it has caught up with the time before COVID. But what happened is that the infrastructure, especially cabling and networking, really took off because of the amount of infrastructure work that took place post-COVID. That blue line is really the spend on the platform that we saw over the last 18 to 24 months post-COVID, particularly in recovery from COVID, into infrastructure, cabling and networking. And you can see the massive growth really compared to the equipment work. The equipment work, it just recovered to pre-COVID spend, but the infrastructure is where really a lot of the investments are. To add a little bit of a color into this, we broke down this to you by really equipment type. And so the chart here, what it shows is two bars. The light blue bar is the year over year, 2022 compared to 2021 growth, trend of growth on our platform, driven by the spend of the service buyers. And then the dark blue ones, the navy blue ones, these are post-COVID compared to pre-COVID. It tells you how much COVID accelerated some of the key trends of spend, the shift in technology spend priorities. And so you can see, as we mentioned earlier, security is really a massive macro trend that is here to stay and will continue. And so 34% growth year over year, but when you compare post-COVID to pre-COVID, 145% growth. And we expect that this macro trend is going to continue because security cameras is such a mandatory and almost now mission critical for safety. And networking, networking and cabling infrastructure is what we expect would soften a little bit in Q1 and Q2, but will come back fiercely. But what we're sharing with you here is that there is massive growth in cabling and networking, and this is driven by, again, the infrastructure work that was needed year over year, 50% plus growth. But then post-COVID compared to pre-COVID, almost double on networking. And this is mainly driven by wireless. Wireless is taking the industry by storm. A lot of need for wireless because of the massive explosion of these devices, connected devices that are everywhere in retail. They require a lot of massive wireless bandwidth, which is putting a lot of pressure on telecom carriers to really expand the bandwidth and bring to the stores the right bandwidth of telecom, and also inside the store retail, the retail stores and even commercial buildings. There is really refresh of infrastructure work related to telecom and also cabling. That is not the same as you compare it to the traditional equipment like the desktop, laptop, or the point of sale. They're going through normal growth, but the growth of the connected devices, particularly security and infrastructure, was massive, and we do expect that will come back and continue post the recession scenario in the first half of the year. Prediction 4 is that you need to get granular by segment. So recession scenarios favor those that really play by the niche, not the generalists. So you need to get granular on your segments and really get to look at the segments by more granularity. And one of the things that we look at here at Field Nation is we like really to look at the segments by 3 dimensions. The location type, is it retail apparel? Is it grocery? Is it convenience? So the location type, the technology or the application, and the service type. Is it deployment? Is it a break fix? And when you look at segments in this micro way, it gives you an understanding of which ones are growing and which ones are shrinking. So our advice to you is to get granular in your segmentation and see how this is working in your revenue portfolio. But also what we're predicting is that retail grocery, convenience, and restaurants are going to continue to see growth even during recession, because these are mission critical location types. Some location types are going to continue to see normal growth, but not like thrive as the ones on the top, like pharmacy, discount, and general. And some segments are going to see drop, including apparel and mall. You might start seeing some site closures. Banking, financial insurance, and hospitality. And then really prediction 5 is about connected devices. These are going to massively continue to explode, especially cameras and sensors. Expect these to continue exploding. And so if you are a small OEM doing this work, or if you're OEM doing this work, kudos. This is something really that is going to continue. Prediction number 6 is labor crisis. Unfortunately, it is here to stay. It is not going to get resolved over the shorter cycle. This is a cycle that might take 5 to 7 to longer years to really resolve. And the reason is it is driven actually by demographics and inherent factors more than anything else. And John shared earlier some of the demographic stats. So this stat comes from our friends at the TSIA, where there's 46% of the field services technician demographic that is going into retirement. They're 50 plus. And when Field Nation surveyed these field service technicians, we found that 63% of them favor flexibility. They want flexibility into their schedules, which is bringing a lot of them into our marketplace. In fact, we're seeing an influx of registrants into our marketplace, over 600 a week of technicians that are registering, wanting to get work. And this is good news for those that are looking for field service labor. Yes, permanent labor is fading away given the demographic, but these technicians are also looking for flexibility. So there is an alternative solution. And then prediction 7, we do expect that some input costs will decrease, driven by the Fed's trying to control the inflation by reducing, by increasing the interest rates. So this correlation, the inverse correlation between increasing the interest rate, reducing the inflation, will impact especially the labor cost a little bit. We're already beginning to see anywhere from 2 to 5% drops in hourly labor costs in the marketplace. This is good news. That is definitely to be taken into account, especially during the first half. So we should expect to see some reduction in labor costs particularly. However, for the travel and equipment, it's really increasingly difficult to predict what would that mean to travel and equipment, because there are other factors that are impacting them. Supply chain disruptions is a factor that is very hard to predict, so that will also influence the costs, as well as gas prices, which are also influenced by geopolitical cross currents. So very difficult to predict. The only thing that we can predict is that labor costs as an input cost will start to soften a little bit and reduce, and that is as a factor of demand beginning again to get some power, with market moving more into balance from the imbalance that was happening during the last few quarters, where supply had a little bit more of the power and raised the prices significantly. So input costs, travel is hard to predict. Equipment is hard to predict because of cross currents driven by supply chain disruptions and geopolitical factors. But we do expect labor will decrease anywhere from 5 to 10%. We already are seeing drop in 2 to 5% in the marketplace, hourly labor costs driven by the increase in interest rates and the softening of inflation rates a little bit. And so what we really want to leave you with is 3 major actions that we want you to take home. One is get granular on your market. The market will pay premium for those that are not generalists. They understand how to microsegment their market. They're looking at which microsegments are growing, which microsegments are shrinking, and looking at venturing out. One of the mistakes that many companies do during recession is that they focus only on reducing costs without focusing on becoming a little bit more surgical about growth. So get surgical about growth. Look at the microsegments, which ones of them are growing, and go pursue the ones that are growing. There is a chance definitely for that. And then compete on customer experience and bet on that. This is not going anywhere. In fact, consumer digitalization is going to continue. There are so many retailers and many commercial B2B experiences that are still behind and are trying to catch up. The majority of them actually, so this is going to continue. And this is something to definitely bid on. So all the technologies that are related to that we went through, kudos, continue to focus on that. And that means that really some of the technologies here are do or die. And then get agile, variabilize your P&L, try to rely more on variable on-demand labor as opposed to a lot of fixed costs, because during this time you need to adapt, and you are positioned to adapt a lot more if you variabilize your P&L as opposed to rely mostly on fixed structure P&L. With this, I'll turn back to Delia for questions.
Sure, we do have time for just one question. I think we're coming up at the end of our session. So we have a question that's come through from Ryan asking, any recommendations on what we should share with customers to ensure we retain projects when they do return?
That you have a sense. So let me repeat the question to make sure that I understand it. Any recommendations that they can share with their customers? Can you repeat the second part of the question?
Sure. So it's what we should share with customers to ensure we retain projects when they do return.
Oh, that you have the capacity. I definitely would love to hear John's opinion on this, viewpoint on this. But one thing that you want to always make sure that your customers really internalize and understand is that you are not compromising the customer experience. You are retaining your vendor relationships. You are retaining your skills and talent. You are not really getting rid of the critical skills that are important for fulfillment. Is that fulfillment and customer experience will not be compromised during this time. This is very important to make sure that your customer really keeps understanding. John.
You know, we were talking the other day about now is the time to be investing in infrastructure. And I think that that's the message we need to be giving to our customers. There's so much emphasis on helping our customers be successful, not just selling them technology. And, you know, if they're trying to slow down infrastructure projects because of a slowdown in the market, what's going to happen 2 quarters from now when the market flares back and they're dealing with outdated systems? I mean, Southwest Airlines is a great example. So, you know, I think that that's the counseling we need to be giving our customers is there are always ups and downs in the market. We've seen much worse ones in the past, and things will be back, I think, perhaps even faster than Q3, Q4. But now's the time to invest and be ready for that boom when it comes. And if they don't take that action, their competitors will.
One thing, John, totally 100% agree with you. One thing again that I'd like to point out is that one of the things that customers always worried about when they think that, you know, recession is going to impact you by reducing cost is that this is going to compromise customer experience or customer satisfaction or ability to fulfill based on reducing, you know, vendor relations or the critical skills in-house. Just make sure that you keep your QBRs with your customers, your monthly reviews with your customers, really focus on your positioning and your ability to fulfill and the superior customer experience you have for them.
All right. Thank you both so very much. And for those of you who have submitted questions and we didn't get a chance to answer them, please rest assured we will get someone from our team to follow up. We have come to the conclusion of today's live webinar. Just a quick couple of reminders before we sign off. There will be an exit survey at the end of today's live webinar, so please take a few minutes to provide your feedback on the content and your experience by just filling out that brief survey. Also, a link to that recorded version of today's webinar will be sent out within the next 24 hours. Again, I'd like to take this time to thank our presenters, John and Wael, for delivering an outstanding session. Thank you to everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's live webinar. 7 field services predictions to increase revenue and improve CX in 2023, brought to you by Technology and Services Industry Association and sponsored by Field Nation. We look forward to seeing you at our next TSIA webinar. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.